Thanks, guys, for the invitation to come up and talk to you about Polaro today for snow mold control in Canada, a product that we've worked with for a number of years, and excited to show some of the results that we've seen in the research. So, as I mentioned, Polaro is a product that we've been working with now for a number of years, made up of two distinct active ingredients: fluoxystrobin, which is a strobe, otherwise known as a QOI, from frat group 11, and then penthiopyrad, which is an SDHI fungicide from frat group 7. Both of these fungicides, even though they're from different classes, work in a similar manner inside the fungal cell. They both inhibit energy production in the cell by inhibiting activity in the fungal mitochondria. And the mitochondria in any eukaryotic cell is what produces the energy. So in people, it's the same way. What's really interesting to me, and kind of as a professor, I find this kind of fascinating that these fungicides are so specific that they locate not only just to the mitochondria, but specific different sites within the mitochondria. So the strobilurins, they're active at the outer membrane of the fungal mitochondria, whereas the SDHIs are active in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So these different classes, the different products, both inhibit energy production in the cell, but do so slightly differently. They're both acropital penetrants or xylem mobile penetrants. They both have a pretty broad list of diseases that they control. Fluoxystrobin has a broad list, especially for a QOI. QOIs are kind of known for having a relatively narrow spectrum. Fluoxystrobin can control dollar spot, which almost no other QOI does. And then for penthiopyrad also has a very broad spectrum of diseases that they control, probably the broadest spectrum of diseases controlled of all of the SDHIs. Both of these active ingredients are relatively unique in the snow mold market. You don't see them in a lot of different products. And so for us to test these two active ingredients together, I think was interesting for us here at Wisconsin, because we hadn't seen them a lot for snow mold control. And as you'll see over the next few slides, it performed quite well, and I think is a good option for snow mold control. So I'm going to walk through the past several years. We've actually tested Polaro, I think, going back to 2019. I'm going to focus on just the past 3 years, really, to show how the products performed compared to some more standard type products up in Marquette. And again, Marquette is sort of our highest pressure site. Really, it gets snow mold every year, and typically in most years a very, very strong level of snow mold. So if the product performs pretty well there, we know it's going to perform pretty well for the vast majority of golf course superintendents. So we go back to 2021, 2022. Here's a picture of the plot. You can see there's a lot of brown, and where it is brown, it's really brown. So we had very strong snow mold in this particular winter, and we had about 100 treatments. Most years we had between 90 and 125 treatments in our snow mold trials. I'm not going to, show you the results from all of them. Just kind of pull out the ones that are really of strongest interest. And so we had 95% disease in the non-treated controls. This was primarily pink snow mold, so really, really heavy pressures. And Polaro is performing very well. Even on its own, it's down right around 10%. Disease, which is a significant reduction, obviously providing very good control. With this heavy pressure, there was another treatment in the trial that added in Daconil, and it was basically at 0% disease. So we compare it to sort of one of the standard type snow mold products like Instrata, and performing very similarly to Instrata in this particular year. So again, in this year, very heavy pressure, Polaro performed very well even on its own. But then mixed with a little bit of Daconil weather stick provided an even more effective level of control. Moving ahead to the next year, 2022, 2023, here's a drone shot of that particular plot, and this was a bloodbath. This was a really, really damaging year for snow mold across much of the upper Midwest, much of Canada, and much of the Rocky Mountain West. And this actually was the winter that we saw more breakthrough on what I would call good treatments than we'd ever seen before. There's a lot of brown in this plot. And the reason for that is we had warm temperatures in late November, early December, after many superintendents had applied their snow mold products. We had some significant rainfall events in early December, and then a lot of snow after that. and including snow well into March, April, and even May. And so what happened in that rainfall event in December really got rid of most of the fungicide. It washed most of it away. So it left those plots relatively unprotected. And then the long duration and the heavy amount of snow that occurred after that just made it really, really tricky for products to control snow mold. So we take out sort of that same subset that we looked at last year in 2021, 2022, and look at it again in 2022, 2023. The non-treated control was at over 70%, so very high. And you might look at that Polaro, the high rate of Polaro there, around 15, 18% disease. That's actually as good as any treatment performed in the trial. So really, really heavy disease. Polaro performed very well. Still performing pretty well at the lower rate. And in this particular year was better than the high rate of Enstrada by a fair margin. So even in this really heavy pressure, we're seeing effective control with Polaro SC in Marquette against pink snow mold. Here are some pictures. There on the left is the non-treated control. You can actually see it was very warm by the time we could get there, and there was actually a little bit of regrowth. That's what's happening with some of that green grass in the non-treated control. But the Polaro there is largely quite clean, anywhere between 10 to 20% disease as we went between the reps, which again is as good as any other treatment performed in this trial. So that's heartening for this product to see it perform well under really, really difficult conditions. Moving ahead then to this past winter, then here's a drone shot of the same plot. Of course, it snowed the morning that we were going up to rate, so we had to quick shovel that off. This past winter was interesting in that it was a relatively brief winter as far as the length of snow cover is concerned, but we still saw a lot of snow because it was very warm going up into that snow cover. So it was very warm in November, December, and the plants were not hardened really at all. And so we only had probably 4 to 5 weeks of snow cover, which is very short by Marquette standards. But we still saw a lot of disease, and it was almost entirely pink snow mold. So we look at how the product performed in this year. Non-treated controls were at 70%. The Polaro performing well, especially at that higher rate. Enstrada did perform better in this year's trial compared to the previous year's trial. Again, it's impossible really to determine exactly why individual products perform well in one year and they don't perform quite as well in another year, and that's why we try and average things out over multiple years. And so we know over years of testing that Enstrada is a good product. That's why we always kind of compare newer products to Enstrada, and Polaro is performing quite well year after year in comparison to products that have been around and are considered standards over the years. So here's pictures of the non-treated control on the left, quite a bit of disease, and then the Enstrada there in the middle performing well. And then again, just a light sort of speckling, again, about 10, 12, 15% disease under heavy pressure conditions with the Polaro there. So overall, we've been impressed with the product. It's performed well, multiple locations, multiple years. Additional snow mold fungicide resources, here are available for you to look at. Again, we post all of our results online on our website, tdl.wis.edu/results, going back to 2009. Looking through and kind of preparing for this presentation and going back through the data, Polaro performed very well up against Enstrada and up against a lot of standard products under those really heavy pressures. And it doesn't have, it's going to be a lower use rate product compared to Enstrada. And so I think it performed very well. And that's not something that we often see year after year. There's not that many treatments that fall into that category that perform that well. So. Yeah, I mean, I think from my experience working with Polaro now over the past 5 years, that it's a great product to use really anywhere in the golf course. It's performed well enough, certainly to be used on fairways and tees, and I think in a lot of situations, it's performed well enough to be used on its own on putting greens as well. Areas that have really heavy pressures, you might want to spike it with an additional product. but I think Polaro has performed very well in our trials, and would have no concerns recommending it in a lot of different uses on the golf course. Yep. So I'm a big believer in the pre-application. So whether we call it a pre-application or a primer or an early application, I'm a big believer in that, because again, it gets back to the discussion we just had about knocking back the fungus as much as you can. And that early application or that primer application is going to knock back the initial growth of the fungus, so that it's already weakened when you come in with your later application. So that's the first recommendation that I always make if I talk with a superintendent who's had a decent amount of breakthrough, is to add in a primer application 3 to 4 weeks prior to your normal application. And I think Polaro would work well as a primer application, because the most common primer application is a DMI. That's what most superintendents will use if they are going to make, because they get some cleanup of leaf spots and dollar spot and that sort of stuff, and then they also get some knockback of the snow mold fungi. However, we're seeing more and more breakthrough with pink snow mold, and DMIs. Most DMIs are weak on pink snow mold, so I think we're actually not having as much of an impact on snow mold as we could if we use a DMI for that primer, if pink snow mold is the primary snow mold of concern at your location. So I've been talking with more and more and recommending other types of products that have better efficacy against pink snow mold to use as your primer application, and then hopefully that you also get some of those other cleanup benefits as well. And Polaro would provide that. So I think Polaro would work well as that pre-application primer type treatment. So that's all the information that I have. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me.